welcome to my first YouTube video. Today I'm going to introduce myself and show you a little luggable PC from Japan that is responsible for rekindling my interest in 80s and 90s computing, and by proxy, responsible for this video and channel. Being a kid of the 90s, I often had electronics or gadgets handed down to me from those who no longer wanted them, usually broken, old or obsolete. But to me they were interesting and fun. I'd spend hours tinkering with them, sometimes causing them to explode, sometimes learning how to fix them, but having lots of fun along the way. As a teen, I had many collectible computers and consoles, all of which were long gone by the time I moved out of home and started working. The joy of retro tech was quickly replaced with, hey, I'm working now and can afford a Pentium. And those old handed-down items was a luggable computer, a big, bulky, compact Portable 3, sporting a bright, eye-destroying amber screen and a cute little keyboard with a curly cord. I'd spend hours on it, playing games, writing programs. I could sit on the couch in my parents' lounge room with the keyboard on my lap, then have the unit itself perched up on the coffee table. The idea of luggable computers has always appealed to me, and while today they're relegated to computing history, replaced by shiny laptops and smart devices, to me they'll always have a place in my heart. So when the malware event of 2020 kicked in, I found myself suddenly at home with some spare time and began to think, wonder if I should get a really old computer for my retro shelf. Something yellowy, beige, to match my Commodore 64. Could be good for a laugh. Wonder what's on eBay. Well, this was on eBay. A Sharp PC-7100 luggable computer. It would suit perfectly. Neat little yellowy beige luggable, looking similar to that compact I had back in the day. Sold. The ad described the luggable as is not working, and the seller claimed the unit would turn on, make a horrible noise and not boot from any disk. To someone like me, this is a neat little project, so I jumped in and purchased it straight away. It arrived a short time later, expertly packed by the seller Retro Shop Box. You can see the link to their store in the description of this video. I quickly unboxed, of course, and put it on the workbench. Luckily it made it in one piece, well, two if you can count the keyboard. Also lucky for me, the not booting issue was resolved by cleaning the floppy drive and the loud noise was rectified by replacing the power supply fan. So here it is, the Sharp PC-7100. It's in its open state here with the keyboard detached. As you can see with the keyboard, it's an XT style layout, but actually with the AT layout for function keys. Sharp do promote this as an AT layout keyboard. I would say it's somewhere in between, probably closer to the XT standard. Keys are a nice size. They've actually got a pretty good actuation on them as well. It is mushy, so if you're used to any of those sort of light-on style keyboards where you've got that mushy dome, that's what this is. But you know, typing on it for a reasonable length of time, or bashing out a quick document, it'd be perfectly fine. Playing games, obviously you've got to use the number pad over here for the keys. It's not too bad. Again, pretty playable, pretty usable, not much of an issue, and the keyboard's the least of the issues when it comes to this machine and gaming, but we'll get to that in a little bit later. You'll see on the front of the unit, and I'll just move the keyboard out of the way, see on the front of the unit you've got a bit of a recess for the cable to sit in, makes it nice and neat, and you can just attach and leave the cable in there. Probably good for taking it, if you're going on a plane or something, put it in there so you don't knock it accidentally. When it comes to the front of the unit, it's pretty simple. You've got your standard LCD. This one's a backlit super twist display, single color. The brightness is pretty ordinary. Contrast is reasonable. It is touted as being a contrasty screen. I would say the contrast is actually quite good for what this is. You've got a tilt function. You've got a little hard disk embossing here. That's the main thing with this PC-7100 is you do have a hard drive that should be inside. Unfortunately, my model does not have that inside. The previous owner removed it, which is a bit of a shame. I was unable to get it, so that's lost forever as far as this machine's concerned. Some people out there have reached out and said that they do have those parts, and I guess once things are a bit easier to ship globally, I might be able to get my hands on some spares and see what we can do. If anyone's got one in Australia, of course, please let me know. It'd be great. On here you've actually got a few LEDs. You've got a screen standby LED, which activates when the screen goes into a power standby. I would say that's pretty good if you're typing a long document. You don't want the screen to burn in and you walk away. It does have a screensaver mode built in. Power LED, floppy LED for whenever that's being accessed, and your hard drive LED, which we probably won't see stay on past a check when the unit turns on. That's about it. This tilt's pretty cool. I'll activate it now. You'll probably notice something with this screen when I do it. There you go. Nice and reflective. So there's my screen in the background and my recording equipment. This screen is really quite reflective. In fact, you can't use it outside at all. And even if you have a bit of natural light coming through, it's not usable. Not usable at all. I'll show you the rest of the unit. This keyboard does latch back in. Hopefully I'm not getting in the way of the camera too much here. Latches back in. The keyboard feet are supposed to sort of click in. Mine are obviously well used. Turn it around to the side. You'll be able to see that we've got a power switch, and that's the area where the power supply fan is. Originally that was the one that was noisy. Replace that. Moving it around to the back, you can see you've got your standard power port. You've also got a voltage selector. So obviously my region in Australia, we want it on 240, not 120. Got a dummy here. This is actually for a CRT. So you can use an external display with this unit if you've got it configured. There's a little card that should be inside. Mine's missing it, unfortunately. And as a result, I don't have any way to export picture to an external display, which is a real shame because the internal display really is rubbish. But that's okay. It is what it is. And we've got a standard set of ports here. You've got your parallel port and your serial port. Nothing really much to say there. They're pretty standard. And you've got your fax and modem dummies there. So that's another option with this unit. You can get another card that sort of sits up here, which will be the modem. Now, last but not least, you can see the floppy drive and where the hard drive would be. My one doesn't have it. 5¼ inch 360K with a push button locking mechanism, which is pretty good for this era. Canon had a lot of those type of drives made. Canon, Epson, all those guys. This is a Canon drive. It's referred to as a 1/3 height. So if you put this inside a standard bay, firstly you wouldn't be able to use this fascia, but if you just use the drive by itself, take up about 1/3 of the slot. So that's the outside of the unit. I think we should take a look inside. Thankfully, it's pretty easy to access this one. We've only got a couple of screws, and the whole unit will come off. You'll note that I've left one screw in there. That's on purpose. It's actually for this expansion. After a little bit of persuasion, trying very hard, you can see, you may be able to pick it up on the camera. You can see here it is quite brittle. This plastic has been well used. This side's not too bad. You'll note on the inside there's a bit of shielding. That's just to help earth this stuff. Alright, now onto the unit. So I'll try to get this one a bit closer to the camera. The motherboard is really small, as you can see. This area here would normally be where the graphics card is. As you can even see, there's a screw there for it. The other side's where the modem is. I'll just do a bit of a run through on this board. So firstly, you've got your power cord, you've got the buzzer, and it really is a buzzer connector, keyboard, floppy drive, monitor. This should have been where the hard drive one was. My one's missing, obvious reasons. And on the motherboard, as I said before, look, it's quite small. Let's get that out of the way. Motherboard is quite small, particularly for this era. I think Sharp did a great job here making this board really compact. This is most likely in some sort of laptop as well. I don't think they would have just kept it just in this. Got your CPU there. It's a 8086 base CPU. Got your 8087 coprocessor socket there. Standard chipsets. BIOS, which has a cool bit of like not CMOS, because not really. It's got its own setup ROM as well, inbuilt, which is quite nice. I'll show you that a bit later. And in regards to the RAM, you'll notice this is the area, it's all populated. So I'll get a bit of a close-up of this one. You should be able to see, it's not coming out that clear, just on this side here, there's an option for 512K, 640K, and 768K. 768 is pretty interesting. I haven't been able to get that configuration working yet. I believe you can. Sharp actually call it 704 in all of their manuals, so I think they're only anticipating 704K. That's what my unit's decked out with, and I just did that by default. It was 640K, so those two ones were filled in when I got it. I simply just bought 4 extra chips on top that I had spare, just to basically test and see what it did. And it is cool, it does work, 704K, and that reports as base or conventional memory. Normally you see 640, in this case you see 704. Doesn't really add a heap, but if you think about it on this type of machine, that extra 64K is quite valuable. We can load DOS in it, for example. We can probably load a couple of drivers, and certainly that's what I use it for. Because this unit has no storage outside of the floppy drive that comes with it, I am relying on something like the LPT here, or the parallel port, and some other bits. So I'm actually going to be using this guy right here, DataFab. Now, this was a Vogons find. I'm a big browser of Vogons. I think it's a fantastic website. If you're into retro stuff and you haven't gone there, you're not into retro stuff. You need to go there. It's fantastic. Between that and VCF, it's pretty cool. This DataFab is well renowned for out there for being pretty robust, pretty useful. It's also compatible with this unit. The first thought I had when I got it was, hey, I should just use a zip drive or something like that. No, you're in for a world of disappointment. This parallel port is really old and basic. Doesn't support just about anything that the zip drive does, and I haven't been able to even use the Palm Zip style driver that's been modified for the 8086. My one it just simply doesn't work. So in this case, the DataFab's great. It's using a shuttle-based chip, which is very common, very easy. It works in what's called nibble mode, which is excruciatingly slow, but it does work, and it means I can put more storage on, and I don't have to necessarily worry about swapping disks or mucking around. But for a bit more of a sensible approach, this guy, the old Gotek, again, anywhere you'll see on YouTube, you'll see this guy pop up. The Goteks are really popular, and the flash floppy firmware that's on here means that I can pretty much just disconnect the existing drive, put this in its place, and I've got myself a lot of floppy drive storage. The beauty about this unit, about the Gotek that is it emulates things, so you can set it up as a double density 360K drive, which is what's in this unit, and being an XT style machine, or an early type of machine, it doesn't support things like high density, so you're not going to get anything like that in here. You're basically stuck with any double density format. Flash floppy and Gotek support obviously 360K, but you can also use 720K out of the box, which is nice and easy. 720K works just fine. You can boot off it. You can do whatever you're doing. It's beautiful. There's actually also another one around, a 2.5 meg double density format, which is I'll put a little clip up, but essentially the software HXC will use that. You can create disks with it. It'll work. And I've been successful loading it on here, but there is a few caveats. You do have to sort of boot off another image first. You do have to stuff around a little bit. And you do have to use something like DOS 6 for some reason. I think even DOS 5 I was having a few challenges just with sector not found and things like that, even after running some of the like N-format utilities that are out there, and I'll put those links down the bottom as well. N-format's fantastic. If you've got an older unit and you want to use some non-standard formats, that's fantastic. But even with that BIOS patch and this unit, I was unsuccessful. The ones that worked best for me was the 2.5 meg by itself with DOS 6.22 or the 720K or 360K, and really I'll get to that a bit later, but it's not too bad. Obviously the larger formats do get incredibly slow on this unit, but even if you're just using it as 720, I found it to be pretty useful from a load time perspective. So now I think we'll get this back together, switched on, and we can take a look at how this thing operates. So here's the PC-7100 screen in all of its glory. Recording is extremely difficult with both my equipment and the lighting in my study. Switching off the lights, positioning the camera just right is really as good as I can get it. If you take a look at some of the other videos of YouTubers with Sharps or Tandys with the Super Twist display, you'll see they have a similar level of difficulty when recording. At this point too, I must apologise for the sound. The fan on this power supply is still very loud. It's quieter than the original one, but not by much. I'm on the lookout for a suitable replacement, maybe an Outtro or something. As you can see, I've got DOS 6.22 loaded on this one, and Qt Mouse is installed, and that's because I'm using a very simple but old Microsoft mouse on that port. First thing we're going to check out here is actually the setup menu. So on the keyboard there's a key for it, and you get a little bit of a menu driven configuration utility here. You've got the time and the date, if I hit the right key that is, the time and the date, and you can only change things by moving up and down on the keypad and then spacebar to change it. So for example, if I want to bring this thing into the 20th century, or 21st century I should say, there we are, and we can set it to 2021. I'm not going to bother setting the rest of it. There's a good reason for that. This clock is only for the menu and only for the Sharp. It's only exposed to DOS 2.11 version of Sharp that they use. For some reason, normal DOS doesn't have the ability to see this clock or read it. Get to that a bit later, but it is a little bit strange. It's going through the rest of the options here with the display. You can obviously change the cursor blink rate, so that's handy when you're in a terminal or an editor. You can change your cursor type. This is more for the mono and word processing modes, same with the blink. The display background is quite interesting. As you can see with this one, it's in what's called standard at the moment. You can actually flip it to inverse. I reckon that's probably better for something like a terminal or something where you're going to be staring at it for ages. But I kind of find the standard mode to be a little bit faster for some reason, assuming that means it's probably got to do less when it's updating the screens for things like games or menus. And with the display mode here, you've got graphics. So by default, this thing's using a CGA in a monochrome array, and you can change it to mono. And what that'll do is it'll disable the CGA and just make it run at MDA mode, which is useful for text processing, things like that, file management. I'll leave it at graphics for now. There's not a huge penalty in using graphics mode. In fact, I haven't really spotted much difference, other than the fact that one uses 16K and one uses 4K of video RAM. Apart from that, not much difference. Backlights, you'll see here, I'll switch through the mode. It's already on the brightest mode. That's off. That's dim, very dim. That's standard, usable somewhat. Bright's really where we're at though. And you've also got a backlight timeout, so you can leave this unit idle for a while. The screen will go into a standby. There's actually a little LED on the screen for that, which I pointed out earlier. That'll come on, and it will just turn the backlight off. So I'm not sure it saves that much in a way of power. Probably saves the screen a little bit. Not quite sure what else you'd use it for. And on here you've got your internal serial I/O. By default the baud rate's 1200. Go 24, 48, 9600. 9600 is usually what I would use for a modem or lap-link connection or something like that with serial. Standard fare for your data settings there, usually used for a modem. COM2 there's none, and you can't change that. There's nothing you can change there. COM2 is if you've got the other connections like a modem or something like that inside. With the printer interface, it really is just a basic parallel. There's no other settings really. You can change it to a serial connection. Not sure how that actually changes much. It certainly doesn't help when it comes to things like the data fab. It also didn't help when I was trying it with lap-link either. The interface, you can change some of the standards. These are just for a printer. I think there's a printer that comes with this model, 700p. Speaker volume, you've got, I believe, high, off, low, or medium. I'll leave it on medium. The speaker I've put in here is just a standard PC speaker that you'd find in a common desktop. I did replace the buzzer that was in here. It basically didn't work. It was distorted and completely useless. Replacing it to this one has made it still distorted, but not completely useless. When it comes to processor speed, by default this thing's set to 7.37 MHz, which is useful. In this case, that's what standard is, but when you can switch it to slow, it'll go back to 4.77. I'll show you how that works in benchmarks a little bit later. And you can reset the defaults by pressing that. Now when you're done, you simply hit setup again, and then all the settings that you've entered are now on this. There's no reboot necessary. It is what it is. So taking a bit of a look at this memory that I did. So as I mentioned before, I did upgrade the memory in this unit. When you run mem, it's going to show you something which you don't normally see, at least when looking at conventional memory. Most people sort of think conventional memory tops out at 640K. It's actually not true. It's closer to 1 megabyte, but it depends on how your unit's configured. And you've got your standard base memory, which is up to 640K, which usually isn't used for any ROMs or anything like that. But then the 384K above it is commonly used for things like ROMs, your video memory, your BIOS, things like that. Sometimes there's a couple of holes or upper memory blocks that you can use. And in this case, you'll note that there's actually no upper memory blocks on this unit, despite me actually having technically upper block memory. And that's just because it's not being handled. So it shoves it all in conventional, and you can actually execute all 704 of that K, obviously if the program supports it. And I am aware at this point that if I use DOS 5 or DOS 3.31 or DOS 2 or something like that, I'm going to get way more memory free. In fact, with the DOS 0.211 that comes with the Sharp, I'll actually get close to 700K free when it's done. Pretty amazing, actually. DOS 2 really didn't take much resources at all. But unfortunately with this one, DOS 2 and DOS 3 and even DOS 5, I was just having so many troubles with the GoTech and with the data fab that I just decided I'd stick with 6.22. Bit easier for me to sort of manage, but yeah, obviously the ideal would be to land somewhere in between and figure out how to get around those problems. Now, if I am using the original floppy drive in this unit and not the GoTech, which is what I'm doing today, but if I'm using the original floppy, I would usually just use that with DOS 2.11. If I'm just operating out of floppy mode, and if I'm going to use something like the data fab, I'd still use DOS 3.31. It does actually work. It's really the GoTech and the different versions of the floppy images I'm using here, the 720K and the 2.5 meg expanded ones. They're the ones that are sort of causing the older versions of DOS a bit of grief. And even with DOS 5, it'll actually see it, but then sometimes when I'm writing or reading from it, it'll just corrupt and just make a mess. It's obviously because it's not meant to use those modes. That's just something we're doing for this demonstration, and it makes the GoTech does make this unit a bit more extensible. So I think at this point, I'm just going to flick over to another disk on the drive. So I've technically swapped disks now. We're now using a 720K disk. You'll see there that 615K is used, 53 odd is remaining. That's still a standard double density format. It's just in I guess, a different mode. Typing in the dark is not that easy, particularly at the angle of this keyboard, so bear with me for my typos and slow typing. So what we're using here is CheckIt version 2.1, which was made in 1989 by Touchstone Software Corporation. This was the go-to information test and benchmark suite back in the day. It'll do some startup investigation and then present us with a menu-driven interface. As someone who'd repaired PCs back in the early 90s, this was definitely something that I relied on. First thing we'll do is have a look at the system information. It's detected DOS 6.22 and a BIOS date of November 1986. This makes this firmware one of the latest ones available for the PC-7100. You can see an 8086 processor with no coprocessor yet. Do have one. 704K base memory with about 635K free. You'll note there's obviously no extended memory, no expanded memory, nothing like that. You can't have it in an XT, at least at this level. You can actually get in a standard XT desktop, you can use above boards and things like that and use some sort of memory expansion or extension, but it's, again, very, very different to what this is. You'll note that there's a CGA video adapter, video RAM size of 16K. If I had that on mono, it would actually say MDA and 4K. No hard drive found, obvious reasons, it's been removed. Has found floppy. It says no to the clock and calendar. I can tell you there's one there. It's definitely on the motherboard, and it is in the setup. It's just not in here. One thing I'd like to test is using the DOS 2.11 Sharp image, which can actually see the time. and see if CheckIt will give me something different. The only problem is this version of CheckIt's just a little bit too big. I'll probably have to try to find an older version, one that fits on a 360k floppy, then give that a test. That might be a follow-up. Really like to get to the bottom of that clock and calendar situation. Got our parallel port there on 3BCH and our serial port on 3F8H. So fairly standard configurations for those. It's found my mouse and it's found the joystick as 1. So joystick, not sure why it's detecting a joystick. There's nothing on this unit that would accept a joystick, so not sure what that's about. Next thing here is to have a look at the device drivers. So this is what I guess CheckIt will find in the memory ranges. Try to figure out what's there. Nothing really of great interest here. You'll note that it has found the clock. It just doesn't really know what to do with it. Again, it's not really exposed. Various LPT and COM ports, not too much there. Very basic. Now, with these tests, normally I'd run these if I was trying to figure out if the memory was bad, or maybe I needed to check a hard disk or some of the other bits and pieces. In this regards, I won't. We'll just go straight to the benchmarks. Just running through the tests now. Quick CPU, video, and math tests. The math one does seem to take quite a while, obviously with no coprocessor. And there you have it. So I haven't really compared these to an XT desktop. I will at one point. I have one. Be interesting to have a bit of a look. I'd like to see the difference in the CPU ranges here. So you can see here it's found the 8086 at 3.54 megahertz, which is actually quite a bit lower than what I normally see. The dry stones 479, about 637 characters a second, and 9.8k wet stones. That's all slightly above a PC-XT. The speed's a bit weird. I've seen that one sort of fluctuate between 3, 4, 5, or sometimes 6. It's on 3.5 right now. I'm not sure how it detects that. Maybe it's not used to seeing 8086s in this type of configuration. Not too sure. One thing that's interesting is if you just pay attention to those dry stones characters and wet stones rank, one thing I can do here is I can hit setup. You can do this anytime you're in a text mode environment. And I can actually change this processor speed to slow, which would be the XT compatible mode. Now if I go back into here again, I'll need to escape. And we go back into this main system test again. It's actually detecting a faster speed this time of CPU. Video speed's well down. And the math will take a little bit longer. But as you can see, at least it should be on par with a PC-XT. It should be pretty damn close. That's just to make sure if you've got any speed dependent programs now, it's really hard to imagine this thing's actually faster than a full-fledged XT. But if you think about things like timed graphics applications or something like that, presentations back in the day, any sort of slideshow, if it wasn't programmed correctly and programmed more around the PC-XT standard, which everybody had, the only problem we have is, of course, this screen. And I think that sort of lends me to my next point, is this screen is bordering on useless when it comes to anything other than just text. If you think this is going to be able to play some games, look, it can. I'll prove that in a little while, but it really holds the rest of the system back. If you brought this home as a home computer and you wanted to have the kids play some games, or you wanted to do something a bit sort of action focused, like play a bit of Space Invaders or a bit of Pac-Man or something, it's just not great. The experience is really poor. I would love to use this on an external screen. A YouTuber, Tech Tangents, has got a really good demo of this unit, the previous model anyway, the 7000, where they use an external screen, and while they didn't have a great experience with using VET, which was the game that they wanted to play, I actually think there's a few that I've got which will run quite well. The next thing we're going to do is look at Topbench, so I'm going to just swap disks again. You can hear me ticking away on the GoTech. Now, here's Topbench. So Topbench is a new solution that's come out in the retro community. I'll leave a link to the website for the developer below. It's a great bit of software, really amazing. On this model, it will take a really long time here, so I'll probably speed this up. Now we'll get to the benchmarks. So you can see that it's found the Sharp 7100, details I've entered earlier. And what's interesting is if I switch this back to slow, you'll see now that it's sort of looking at an XT clone. It's about 4.77, various speeds. So it's about on. Obviously the compatibility mode's quite accurate. But again, for the purposes of what we're doing, we'll flick it back to standard. So from a Topbench perspective, we get some pretty good results. Now next up, we're going to run an application. Just check what's on this disk first. There we are. So we've got ourselves Microsoft Word. So here we are, Word 5.5, recently released by Microsoft as free. I like Word because this version has a good resemblance to the edit that's already in DOS. It's got a very similar interface. The spell check and thesaurus is quite quick. And here we are. So, type's fine. And this is in graphics mode, so what should happen here is I should be able to bold this. Should be able to put jumps in italics. Maybe we'll put quick brown and underline. So it does support fonts. And you can type in, I guess this is distraction free. I know a lot of people like to use old PCs that aren't connected to the internet with no vulnerabilities or telemetry or anything like that and type away very secure documents or maybe some personal documents. I don't really need to use it for this. It was more just let's have a look at it. And again, you can change, I believe, to inverse here. So a bit easier on the eyes if that's what you want to do. I just like how you can change it on the fly without having to reboot or anything like that. We don't want to save it. Now I really should put Command Com on a few more of these disks images. Stops this sort of thing happening. Just put the simple Command Com file on there. Because I'm booting off an image that's not the one that's currently selected, it'll constantly look for it. Time for some games. First up here is Psion Chess. If I can type it correctly, that is. In this case, we do have a color card, believe it or not. As you can see, we've got some graphics. Doesn't look too bad in this mode. Can't move anything at this stage. One thing I did want to show you, because I didn't hit start, that's why. What I did want to show is this display mode. You can actually change this to a graphical style. There we go, a little bit of a 3D sort of look. And personally, I'm a fan of that. We'll quit that. I'm not great at chess. Now we'll look at something definitely from computers of this era, a game called Turbo. Classic sort of dodgem racing game. Whoops. Pretty difficult again to see what you're doing in this game. Once it gets up to a reasonable speed, yeah, you won't get much chance. I think if I flick it to inverse, does it make it any better? Sort of. Oh, not really. Yeah, once you get those lighter coloured cars, yeah, you simply can't get out of the way in time. So this one's a little bit of a fail, but at least you can see it moving, and you can see some of the challenges you're up against. At the slowest speed, like I'll just keep it in gear 1, so I think that runs it at about half the speed. It's not too bad. If going up to gear 2 again, yeah, the moment you go that full speed, it's not great. Yeah, it's game over, or so it should be. Thanks, Turbo. I've got a high score. Pretty sure anybody with a decent monitor could actually beat that. Now, for something a little bit different. This is the Spectrum Holobyte Tetris, which was a little bit controversial. If you've ever watched the documentary about the game Tetris, there's actually a really cool one that explains sort of how the Russians got a little bit duped, very unfairly so, by some businessmen, and then once they figured out what was going on, they wanted to wind it back pretty quick, and what had actually happened was they'd sold the rights inadvertently for PC to Spectrum Holobyte, who then kind of on-sold that to other people, but the truth is the Russians didn't believe they actually did it in the first place, didn't believe the contract was final or bound. They certainly weren't expecting to see this pop up royalty-free. In the end, it got sorted out. So quite cheeky to go on about this, give you that little background, when actually there wasn't really a binding contract, at least not at the beginning. There might have been by the time this thing was out, but very interesting story if you ever want to learn about it. Gives you a whole new perspective on how relations were back in those days, but also how communication can be so vital in commercial situations. Right. Enough mucking around here. So, screen's not too terrible at this speed. Whoops. You can also change the background, which is neat. See if I can fix up my earlier problem here. There we go. People are probably screaming at me everywhere, do this, do this. Why is he doing it that way? As I said, not a Tetris professional by any way, shape or form. Now I've got myself into a right mess. Embarrassingly bad, but anyway. So no sound, no special effects, no nothing, but you've got a little beep whenever you score. I've got to remember not to keep hitting up to think that I'm changing direction. And you can see even at the, I think I've mucked it up now. Even at the fastest speed, the screen starts to really become an issue. I'm interested, can I change back to standard? What happens there? Yeah. I would say inverse actually looks better. Look, I'm going to let this one fail. Apologies to all those Tetris champs out there. I mean, the Windows one I used to be pretty handy back in the day on. I can't even spell DOS properly. So I apologise to all those people that can play Tetris properly. I am sitting sideways, not really able looking at the screen, so not gonna judge myself too hard on that. So what we'll do now is flick over to another game which I used to play on the XTs back in the day. This one's called Grand Prix Circuit. Distinctive published a lot of really cool titles back in the day. One of my favourites is Stunts, which they did. Stunts has got no chance of running on this PC though, unfortunately. Stop that squeaking. I think we'll just do a practice on this one. A few different cars. I'm sure this is bringing back memories for many of you. Now let's see how this thing handles it. Like I said with the other videos that are out there in regards to running some other car games, they generally run pretty damn slow. This one, the main slowness seems to be the screen, but with GP Circuit, I guess I found a bit of a different experience. I wouldn't say it's super smooth, but I'll just steer here, like it's fairly responsive. Certainly no Gran Turismo. But I'm able to steer somewhat if I pay attention. Oh, there's the understeer. Oversteer, I should say. It's extremely hard sitting on the angle that I'm on though. Wish I had a room camera so you could see just how far I am away from the screen. Now I'm just going to slow right down. I'm just going to try something. Sorry for the noise. just give it a stall. Can I flick back to the other mode? No, I can't. I did want to see what that was like with inverted. I remember it looking slightly better inverted. But yeah, I would say this is running okay, all things considered. When you do the race mode with the other cars on the track, I was able to deal with them as well. It didn't slow down too much. That was a better corner. Let's at least complete the lap. Oh, well boy. Let's not. I'm sorry, McLaren. Probably around that sort of 15 frames a second. Look, at least I did a lap. Pretty awful. Teenage version of me would be quite unimpressed with that. But it runs. Having real trouble typing in this thing too now. Oh, so I was in a Ferrari. I thought that I chose the McLaren. Maybe I did choose a Ferrari. My bad. And look, we'll just drop back to DOS for a second. I just want to see what that looks like with the inverted mode back on. Well, I've got a race this time. And I will go with the Ferrari. It's obviously the car for me. Prepare to qualify. Well, I think I might be prepared to just try to complete a lap. Or maybe get halfway around it. Just want to have a quick look. See how it compares to the inverse mode. Or how the inverse mode compares to the standard mode. That's looking a bit more familiar. Yeah, I would say it's about the same. Not sure how it's coming out on camera. I just feel the black's a bit easier to see, at least from the angle that I'm sitting on. But certainly as things are flashing by, like, you know, the signs and so forth, it's very hard to make out what's on them. But I'm managing to stay on the road a little bit, which is nice. Oh, I say that just as I come off. It seems to be the trend today. I say something and then it happens, or the reverse happens. But look, I think we'll leave it there. Probably would have got a better time than last time. But let's just call it a day. I think the inverse mode looked better, at least to me anyway. Not sure what you guys thought. Here's another classic game. Prince of Persia. So you can see in the standard mode, looks pretty horrendous. I would think that This probably would burn your eyes playing for it for too long. So I want to have a look at just the inverted mode again. Now you can see it actually kind of looks a bit better. And this is not a game that I'm great at. In fact, I'd say I'm absolutely terrible at it. As a kid, I remember finishing it, but for the life of me, I struggle these days to understand what it was I did. I know that I don't have a sword at this point, so I don't think we want to fight that guy. I think what I want to show here is just the ghosting, I guess, on the screen. And it sort of shows why you can't play games like Commander Keen or any of those sorts of platformy type games on this. It's really a bit tough. Anytime there's a lot of change or a lot of speed on the screen. Whoops, don't fall there. But it does play. And you could probably go a fair way in this game. I'm not going to go much further at this point. Look, I'm pretty rubbish at this. What I wanted to demonstrate, I guess, was the ghosting and also just the speed as this goes along. This is obviously made for a 4.77 XT, and really the graphics for the time, and it still actually holds up pretty damn well. But we'll give that an exit at the moment. And again, I haven't put the command on there. I have to do that for these discs. Now, one last game I'll show. Something a little bit testing for this unit. Not that that's hard. Maybe it's in the directory. Anyway. Typing in the dark. The perils. Bit difficult with the mouse. I don't really have it on a good surface. It's also not in great shape, this mouse. You can see me really struggling with this mouse here. I really should change it over. Side to side's okay, it's just the up and down's a problem. Make him start digging. You can see the animations, it's very slow. But again, this is an XT, to keep reminding myself of that. And this is a machine that's 35 years old plus. I think that should do it. Let them dig through. You can see the animations of them going back and forth. Not too problematic, this one, as far as the graphics are concerned. I'm not sure how far I'm able to shift over. Yeah, like shifting the screen off to the edge here. Yeah, it's not too bad. Just the scrolling's not too bad. The update's pretty good with the inverted mode. I'm not sure how this would fare with the standard display. Great game though. This is a classic. So apologies there, for some reason my OBS crashed and I had to restart. But you got to see a bit of me playing Lemmings. I won't bore you with the rest of it, but essentially this will play Lemmings. It'll play it pretty slowly, but it will play it. I did complete that first level. Exiting Lemming, only the one of them. Have a nice DOS. So that brings us to the end of part 1 of the experience of the Sharp PC-7100. In part 2, we'll take a bit of a look at some of the larger programs, have a look at the data fab, and also Windows. Yes, really Windows. I hope you've enjoyed taking a look at my little Sharp Luggable, which reignited my passion for retro tech. Thanks for watching. See you next time.